For nearly 9 months, you will have been providing a snug home for him and supplying food for his rapidly growing body. 9 months is not long in a lifetime, but if you're like the average mother-to-be, when it's nearly over, you'll be ready. So in preparation, you'll pack a bag to take along. Toothbrush, makeup, a bed jacket perhaps, and so on. Useful things, and things to make you pretty.
Right, this is the t-shirt that I wore when in labour with Perry. This belongs to my partner. It makes me think of some pictures that we took of when I was at the beginning, the early stages of the labour, and I'm sat on a birthing ball and I'm wearing this t-shirt, and in that picture I just look really calm and happy. It's a picture full of joy.
And now it's time to call the doctor. He will tell them that you are on your way. It's a relief to know that your baby is finally on his way. You don't need to hurry. There will be plenty of time. Of course, your husband may get a little excited, but don't let that bother you. Your arrival will start into action an experienced team dedicated to helping you bring your baby into the world, to help ensure success in this very important moment for you and your family.
Then there's a flip side to that picture, because there's an element of me that wants to give that woman a big massive hug in that picture, because she has no idea of what is about, what is about to happen to her, the events that are going to unfold, and just the sheer horror of that, and that makes me feel very sad. I feel really sad for her, because she is so positive, and I just think, you're a fool, just sitting there, bouncing on your ball, you have no idea.
Soon your doctor arrives to take charge of things. He will be following your progress closely now, and first he will examine you to see how far along in labor you are. And so you rest, a patient, so far as possible. You knit perhaps, and the first stage of labor continues, taking its own sweet time. Breathe slowly, deeply, easily.
Do you sometimes still think about your birth experience at all, or is that sort of far away now?
It's not as far away as I wish it was. I think it's still on my mind quite frequently. I don't think there's anything in particular that necessarily makes me think of it. It tends to be in the evening when I'm putting her to bed, when we're quiet and she's just in my arms and quiet. Then it tends to be then that I think about how much I wanted her and where she came from and what I wanted around the birth and what I actually got and how different those two things were, I guess. Yeah, springs to mind more than I would like and more often than I expected.
It's really frustrating when you know how birth could be to see how we've messed it up. Somehow, feminists have been militant about abortion, but they've never been militant in the same way about childbirth. And whether that's because once you've had the baby and you're happy with the child and you're so busy looking after the baby that you're not going to go out marching the streets at that time. But so you don't have a cohort of women who are shouting about what's wrong with childbirth. I don't know if that's the reason, but it is crazy that women outnumber obstetricians so much, and yet they don't seem to be able to get the kind of births that they want.
I think what's coming out is this idea that your image or idea of what pregnancy and birth is a really eclectic mix of things that other people have told you or things that you've researched for yourself, and just tons and tons of ideas that you've collected about it. And then on top of that, there's this sort of simplicity, which is what I'm going to do about adding a sort of pencil drawing of a pregnant woman, because you also think, yeah, but it's just giving birth, like, it's a thing that people have done for thousands of years, you know, it's not that complicated. And then as it turns out, neither of those things is really the truth. So I might think about a third layer, which is my actual experience of it.
When we're thinking about birth and about labour, some of the things that women might experience as traumatic are things that might medically be considered as routine or as not necessarily resulting in a negative outcome. And conversely, for some women, they may have quite medically traumatic interventionist births, but personally and psychologically feel relatively okay with what happened and not experience trauma from that. But I think what we know from the research evidence and from certainly this project, when we were talking about how people experience trauma, it is incredibly unique to each woman.
When the mouth of the uterus has opened completely, the second stage of labor begins, and soon you will be taken to the delivery room. The delivery room is much like the doctor's examination room. Its main piece of furniture is the delivery table, where your baby will be born. There is a table with sterile drapes to cover your abdomen, legs, and buttocks, and with sterile gowns, towels, and rubber gloves for the doctors and nurses. Everything is absolutely sterile to protect you and the baby.
After the birth, I began bleeding out, and they kept coming back in, and they'd scrape me out, and then I'd bleed out again, and they'd come back in, and they'd scrape me out, and this happened again about 3 times. And I just remember feeling like, because birthing is very primal, it's a very primal thing, and I do remember feeling like just the fact that kept playing in my head that if I was an animal, I felt they would have treated me kinder, and I kept thinking they would have put me down. They would have put me down by now. They wouldn't have allowed me to suffer that amount of just like pain, and it was just horrendous. And the other thing was, was after the scraping. I remember saying to my partner that I felt like I'd been gang raped, and it was just horrible.
There's an actual whole lot of literature around being called birth rape, that feeling of being raped when you've given birth, that it's tantamount. You can define it as a traumatic birth experience, as a birth rape, which just seems, for some people, it's just the most awful way to describe birth, and for some people it's just the reality, and that fits with their experience. And I think for me, it wasn't akin to feeling rape, but it was something around being violated, this kind of this sameness of feeling through your birth experience, being violated, and the shock of that, the shock that can actually happen. And you're supposed to just kind of walk on and get on. After that, you look after a baby and breastfeed and all those things. So that's my experience, and that was the experience of when I had my first baby, and it was a section, and there's seemingly dozens of people in the room with me, each doing something to my body, and not knowing their names or anything about them, and just feeling totally disempowered and scared and violated.
Well, I mean, there could be traumatic deliveries in a physical sense, that leave her with a damaged perineum and inability to control bowel movements and painful sex and things like that. So there's that kind of traumatic delivery. And then there's the psychological traumatic delivery, which I think does centre on the woman feeling that she wasn't able to do what she thought was the right thing, that her wishes have been overruled, and if that is compounded by a sort of dismissive attitude by the midwife or the doctor, that can really strike at the heart of her self and her feelings of self-confidence and self-worth. So I think it is quite a serious problem. Unfortunately, it's not that common, but it's, I think, more common than it need be.
And so you reach the delivery room, ready to deliver your baby. Contractions are coming along about every 3 minutes, but try not to be overly impatient. Try to keep your mind free of worry and hurry. You can rely on your doctor and his helpers, you know. They've brought a lot of babies into the world. So you will know what to expect. Your doctor will tell you what he is going to do, and more important, what he wants you to do to help your baby along. With each push, some describe it as leaning on it, the baby moves along a little farther. Take your time. There's no reason to hurry.
I think part of it was that I was induced, and I was induced earlier than they would do normally, and I knew all about induction. My background is medical, so I know about postpartum hemorrhage. I know about induction, and I knew about it all from a very medical sense. And all my friends who are doctors who've given birth have had horrific births. So I knew lots of horrific stories, but I think there was an element of, yeah, but it won't happen to me.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it, if I blamed the whole thing on being induced, and lack of control and lack of discussion and risks and benefits being discussed and things. But they wouldn't have that discussion with me, and I didn't put my foot down enough to say, no, I want to speak to the doctor, I want to discuss this, risks, benefits. And they just said no. They just said no, right on the bed, come on, this is what we're doing. And yeah, it did all go wrong, and it was horrific after that. And so if next time I refuse to let them anywhere near me, I genuinely think if I go into labour naturally, why it can't go as naturally as possible. And I'm going to stand up for myself a bit more, I think.
I don't think that most obstetricians go into it saying, oh, I want to be a powerful person. But it's just the way the system is, that you know, they make the rules, they write the labour ward protocols and things like that. And the system has sort of emerged rather than being necessarily manipulated. And it's really rather sad that several hospitals now have an obstetrician who specialises in seeing women who've had traumatic deliveries and helping them to deal with the feelings that they have about that. But I think a badly managed delivery where a woman feels that she ended up having a forceps or a Caesarean section because of the way the labour was managed and her voice wasn't heard, I think the unhappiness or anger about that can last for years and years and years. I mean, I can remember a woman coming to my gynae clinic with a problem which dated back to her delivery 7 years before and bursting into tears about the delivery. So it is very long-lasting and deep-seated. And I think it's only recently that obstetricians have come to understand that this is a problem.
This piece has developed, started with the pipe cleaners, which I thought represented experiences and thoughts and paths that the women have gone through. So it started with that, and the idea now is that this side will represent midwife. So she's got a totally calm, totally reassuring, just all-encompassing, positive feeling that she's able to influence the whole environment with. That's the sort of impression that I would like to give, because I think if people are relaxed, then everything will happen much more naturally. So on this side, I'm going to put very positive images, like this dad. That's what he's envisaging will happen. And then I've got a sort of heart-shaped couple, and the sort of ideal there. There's a woman using a beanbag, and she's got a heat pad on her back. She's at home with the fireplace, and she's got a cat on her back as well. So I thought that was rather nice to just just maybe what people imagine or hope for, or that's the very best that they could get when they're in labour.
So if you can add on the caveats that the vast majority of midwives and obstetricians are doing an absolutely fantastic job in very difficult circumstances. Some of the things that we could look at in terms of reducing disempowerment very much focuses on what the women have said throughout this project. So basic respect, being given as much choice as is possible. If choice isn't possible in certain circumstances and certain situations where it genuinely won't be a great deal of choice in that very sort of short period of time, then giving women as much information as possible before things happen and before things are done. And I think again, and lots of midwives that I've spoken to over the years absolutely promote this message from the off, is that what's routine for medical professionals in any kind of medicine, but again in labour and birth for obstetricians and for midwives, is completely unique and maybe the biggest moment in that person's life so far in terms of giving birth. So what's very routine for us in healthcare might be completely unroutine for that person.
That looks really uncomfortable. Yeah, the face mask that's cling filmed.
That was representing that what you want to do as a midwife is sometimes constrained by policies or sometimes people's perceptions. You've always got that fear of litigation at the back of your head. So you might not be sort of like doing the care that you necessarily want to do because of the temporal pressures with your job, and also because you're doing things just as a precautionary measure to obviously avoid litigation, when actually like it's better to just let things go with the flow, I suppose. The sunshine next to it represents the joy and happiness that it brings to me seeing women give birth.
Other people have said that in these sessions, that once a woman's in hospital there is an expectation that it will become a medical thing.
Sometimes at hospital I think we've got in such a culture of intervention and medicalisation that we will intervene just because it's better to feel that we're actually doing something than doing nothing, when actually birth will prosper better just leaving it well alone really and letting nature take its course.
And after Changing Childbirth, that report came out, and midwives, that emphasised the importance of midwives and giving midwives autonomy so that women could have the kind of births they wanted. Somehow, very few midwifery units actually empowered their midwives to do that, and they just regimented the whole thing, and also the trainee midwives only spend a small amount of their training on the district or in the community, so they don't have a vision of what a normal birth can be like, and that's a real loss, I think, to society.
I had to have a C-section because there were so many implications about, because I had third-degree tears, so if I didn't want anything, bowel, bladder, anything like that, then I'd have to have a C-section. So all throughout the pregnancy I was planning on the C-section, so I had to go into the hospital. And right up until the day, they told me that whoever told me that I had to have a C-section was wrong, and they said you could have done it like just normally. So I was just, from the beginning, just confused as to why they told me all this information. And that was on the very day that I was going in for my C-section. And then all throughout the process being terrified and just scared. And then obviously, as I said, I could see them cutting me through the reflection in the thing. just thinking, why do I have to go through this? And then throughout the whole process, for Carol to be handed to me, I was just crying the whole time, just crying.
Most of the time things don't go wrong. And I suppose this is the thing, it's whether you're an optimist or a pessimist. And I think pessimism has in the ascendant, and that means that more women get things done to them than should, instead of letting nature take its course. And I can't believe that, you know, 1 woman in 4 is having a baby by caesarean section. It isn't necessary. I mean, would the human race have survived if 1 woman in 4 needed a caesarean section to give birth? I don't think it would have populated the world in quite the way that it has done.
We didn't have medical intervention, Eli would have died. So it was a question of, okay, that's great that they can do it and fix it, brilliant. But for people, if it's they're trying desperately to have a natural birth and feel that people are coming and stopping that and not allowing them to do it and not listening to what they have to say and valuing it. Thank you. I guess it's that real, I don't know, there's so many variables, aren't there? And it's such an individual experience. And it's that, you know, ideal that everyone wants, this ideal birth and everything. And but then, you know, you do just want them to be happy and healthy. And but then, having spoken to the other mums, they were saying that's the worst thing to hear when someone says, oh, well, at least the baby's healthy. And I think people's feelings are at the bottom of the list, aren't they, of medical people, because their job is get baby out safe, make mum healthy, but then they're also nurses and caregivers, so you sort of think it should be compassionate.
Do you know if this was a midwife or
Oh, I did that.
You did? Okay. Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah.
This presumably could mean the woman in labour. She's supposed to be singing or in pain, or... And would this be the partner? Or?
Yeah, this was him later on down the line when she's in labour and on labour suite. If I've got more than a couple of women, or if I've got, like, because sometimes you'll have a lady in early labour and a lady that's just delivered, or somebody who's in active labour and somebody else that's in active labour as well, which is I find really hard, because you're doing your obs every 15 minutes, so you're running from, by the time you've done your obs and written them up for one lady, you've got to run next door and do it for them. You write that up and then you're just constantly that. And I hate that. I've got 8 women on the antenatal ward and 1 CTG, you know, and if you've got to sit there and hold it on because a baby's very active, that's 9 other women or 8 other women that you're not really sure what's happening. I really hate that, and I hate it because I can't be present for either of them, and I don't feel like I'm doing either job well. I'm furious. I feel seriously. I feel furious. I feel really angry about having to do that because I can't be there all the time.
It's very frustrating when you can't do what you know you need to do for someone, because people only have an opportunity once, twice, a handful of times in their lives to have a good birth. So it's just such a shame if it isn't as good as it could have been. And you can't make it right if it's just been a horrible disappointment or a horrible experience for a couple. You just can't, you know, you can't change that. Might be able to influence how they feel about it, but what's happened has happened.
It's looking like here. Is that going to be in anyone's way?
Yeah, I reckon it is.
I trust my body to know what to do, and I follow its lead. My body and my baby know how to work together in harmony. My mind is relaxed. My body is relaxed. relax as we move smoothly and easily through labor and birth.
This is the first time I've listened to something like that since I was pregnant, and it was just making me laugh. I believed in it so wholeheartedly, and I never dilated at all. So no, my body didn't know how to do any of it naturally, and I can't even really articulate what that means to me to listen to that now in this setting. But this is a powerful thing to show to someone who invested in that and then had a difficult childbirth.
I have a friend who said to me, if you have a C-section, you won't bond. You won't, what was the word? Yeah, you won't bond, there won't be all those hormones. And I was so angry because I didn't have any choice about it. So yeah, the whole thing in a way makes me laugh, but in another way it makes me furious.
That's what the anger's what I've been trying to work through. I think I have. I've managed to. The project has helped.
This was about the myth of childbirth being natural.
I had like a lot of emphasis in the beginning about natural birthing and no pain relief, and definitely we're not considering my physical and psychological well-being.
I think that's why I chose these two pieces, that they're really the difference between where I was at and where I'm at now.
I think for me it was anger. I was angry about the birth, I was angry about the way I was treated. I was angry about the fact that midwives on the ward had let me down, the community midwives had let me down, but I also felt that I'd let myself down, that I'd let my baby girl down, and that I was failing and angry because of that, and that I'd failed because I hadn't been able to breastfeed, and there was just so much anger, and actually getting that out and the artwork was just really good. And I think that's kind of where the peace and the freeing comes from, because anger ties you up in knots, and making peace with the fact that yeah, that was how I felt, not how I feel.
So, in a very little while, you have become two. And now you can hold your baby. What a wonderful thing to give life to a new human being.
One of the things that can happen, and I think isn't uncommon, in response to people saying, well, actually, I found my labour to be very difficult, I found it to be traumatic, I felt like I was being done to, is there's a real dismissal of that as, but aren't you lucky you aren't giving birth in some awful place where infant mortality is extremely high. And actually what that does is dismisses the individual woman's experience. And it's about respecting and hearing and listening to what happened and how that woman is then processing that, and how that woman would like to process that, and what support the woman needs, if any, outside of friends and family to work through those very, very difficult and very painful emotions. And what we need to have is really comforting and nurturing spaces where women are able to talk about their experiences in a way that they're not going to feel judged. They're not going to feel that they are in any way a bad mother, but there needs to be safe enough spaces for us to do that. And I think the single biggest thing that we could do to help mental health in the perinatal period is to judge less and be a bit kinder.
Fuck this. Fuck this fucking pram. Fuck this shopping. Go to fucking sleep and give me a fucking hour to myself. Why don't you fucking sleep? It's not fucking fair. Fuck playing motorbikes. Fuck ships. Fuck crying. Fuck whinging. Fuck relentless breastfeeding. Fuck boredom. Fuck this exhaustion. Fuck dinner. Fuck dishes. Fuck toys. A mess. Fuck this endless washing. I can see the chaos building around me, and I can feel the chaos building inside me. Fuck not being in control. Fuck formula milk. Fuck food, confusion and conflicting advice. Fuck other mums. Fuck comparisons. Fuck no sleep. Fuck no time. Fuck guilt. Not that that's how